Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and this is the 9th installment for my project where I'm going to read 20 of the best short stories of the 20th century. These are all stories of my own selecting. I will list a link in the description to how I chose them. Now, if I were a smart man, and if I listened to the YouTube algorithm, I would not be making any more of these short story videos. They don't have a lot of view. The likes are okay, but they're just not popular. But I'm having too much fun reading my short stories and talking about them. Maybe I should just read the stories on my own and not make these videos because, as I said, they're just not very popular, but we shall see about that. The story for this week is The Garden of Forking Paths by Jorge Luis Borges. I'm going to put this book down because there is a reflection from the Mylar cover. Originally published in 1941, there have been a few English translations, the first in 1948. I read both translations this week. I read the older one by D.A.Y. and the more recent one by Andrew Hurley. There may be other translations out there. And this is the story of a Chinese gentleman. He is a professor of English, and it is set during World War I. And he is a German spy. And his spy network has been compromised. There is an English officer out to get him, and this Chinese gentleman knows that he does not have much time left to him before he is captured. But he has critical information he wants to give to the Germans. Now, this Chinese gentleman is not a fan of the Germans, but he wants to prove himself as an Asian man, that an Asian man can be successful at what he does. So the Chinese gentleman looks up a name in a phone book. The reader does not know immediately why he is looking up this name in the phone book, but the name corresponds to an address not too far away. So he's out to go to this address. There is the English officer in hot pursuit. There's a little bit of spyness, the little bit of the feeling of a spy story in the beginning, where he's out maneuvering the English officer who's out to get him. But he gets to this house, and what he hears coming from this house is Chinese music. Now, before you get there, the Chinese gentleman gave a little bit of information about himself. He is the great-great-grandson of a famous Chinese governor who withdrew from public life to write a novel and build a labyrinth. The labyrinth was never discovered, and the remains of the novel, or what parts of the novel survive, are a chaotic and contradictory mess. He describes it as, in chapter 3, the hero dies. In chapter 4, the hero is alive again. But this novel was nonetheless published in its unfinished and chaotic state. So the Chinese gentleman goes to this door of this address that he looked up in the telephone book. As I said, there's Chinese music playing. And when he opens the door, there is an Englishman. And I'm just going to call him the Englishman. And this Englishman is a sinologist, someone who studies Chinese culture, language, and literature. And he is fascinated that he has met a descendant of this Chinese governor. I'm sorry about the lack of names, but I can't remember all the Chinese names in the story. And he talks about how he has studied the works of this Chinese governor. especially the novel that he wrote. He has studied it. He has looked at all the surviving remnants and translated it. And he thinks he knows what's going on in this novel. The novel is not chaotic or a contradictory mess. It is very elaborate and thoughtful novel. In this novel, all possibilities of a life can happen. So, as he said, in chapter 3, the hero dies. But that's just only one outcome. Because whatever outcome a person does, or whatever event a person does, there are multiple outcomes. So, in one chapter, the hero dies. But the next one, he's exploring a different path, a different fork where he survives. And in each fork itself can contain multiple forks and forks after that. Because in the Chinese governor's mind, all possibilities in time can exist simultaneously. That means one life does not have one clear path from beginning to end. There are multiple paths, multiple diverging forks where they can go back. So the Englishman is talking to the Chinaman. He says, in one world, I do not exist, but you exist. In another fork, you exist, but I do not exist. And yet another fork, we meet. In one fork, we are friends. In another fork, we are enemies. They all exist simultaneously because what this Chinese governor was doing, he was talking about time. And time is the one word that is never mentioned in any of the existing scripts of this novel. So that is the key to the novel. And the novel itself is the labyrinth, because the Englishman said, at one point, the Chinese governor said, I am going to withdraw to write a novel. In another instance, he said, I am going to withdraw to build a labyrinth. And some people got those two confused, thinking that he had two different projects. But in reality, there was only one project, this magnificent novel that explores all the possibilities of time. But why did this Chinese gentleman seek out this name from the phone book and accidentally happen across a man who studied his Chinese ancestor? Well, as I said, the Chinese man was a German spy, and he had to communicate to the Germans a city that needed to be bombed. It just so happens that the man's last name was Albert, and that the city of Albert in England needed to be bombed by the Germans. So what happens is when they're discussing, the Chinese man looks out the window and sees the English officer pursuing him running up the path. So the Chinese man turns around and shoots the English gentleman in the back, therefore creating a notice in the papers saying that this Chinese man murdered a man named Albert, and that the Germans can therefore bomb the city of Albert. Now, this is just an absolutely brilliant story, because Borges is not necessarily a plot-driven story, although there is a really rather interesting spy plot in this story. This is a story of ideas, because really what Borges wants to talk is about the possibilities of time and the forked nature of time. Does time fork? Do all these possibilities exist in the universe? Some quantum physicists actually agree with Borges, saying that we have many different universes and many different possibilities, that your life exists in many different ways that we do not see because we only exist on one path. But our lives have many paths and many outcomes. And Borges just does this brilliantly. I just love his short stories because he is an author of ideas and of possibilities. And he is someone that everyone should explore. These stories are not long, at least The Garden of Forking Paths is only about 10 or 11 pages, depending on your translation. And I highly recommend it. And it goes to the top of my favorite stories for this project so far. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.